You so much for having me here, and happy Friday, y'all. We made it. I always like to celebrate the end of a week because it means that we made it. So I want to spend my time with you today doing a quick read from my book, The Purpose of Power: How We Come Together When We Fall Apart, and then talking a little bit about what's at stake for us right now and what we can do about it. So before I read, I wanted to talk a little bit about why I decided to write this book. Number one, it felt important to me to be able to zoom out after more than 20 years of organizing, 7 of which have been involved in building Black Lives Matter Global Network, contributing to the movement for Black lives, and fighting for racial and economic and gender justice. And I wanted to spend some time to actually dive into what I think are important reflections for this moment. And, you know, in 7 years of organizing in this movement, what I understand is that there is so little first person accounts of what it means to organize in these conditions. And there are so many stories all over the place that are stories that are not ours. They are stories about us that often get developed and disseminated without us. And I know that when I started out as an organizer 20 years ago, this is the book that I would have wanted to read. This is the book that I would have needed to make sense of the chaos around me, to help make sense of the things that I was being exposed to, and to get a little clearer on not only what we're up against, but what we can do about it. I also felt very strongly, and still feel very strongly, that it is important for us to take the task of building power very seriously. We are in the midst of incredible opportunity and also incredible crisis. And none of this will be resolved without the task and the success of our task of building power. Too often we're not clear about what it means to build power. We orient towards empowerment and self-esteem, but empowerment and self-esteem don't change the rules that have been rigged against our communities for generations. Empowerment and self-esteem don't change culture in the ways that we need it to. And when it comes to the project, right, of every single person being able to access their birthright, which is dignity and freedom and justice, it means that our tasks become even more sharp, especially in a moment where there are incredible attacks and assaults against our scholarship to help people understand better why the world functions the way that it does, how that shapes and impacts us, and what we can do about it. And so for me, this book, this opportunity is a way for us to be clear about the tasks in front of us, not just in terms of the election, but in terms of the next decade. Lastly, before I read, I will just say that, you know, one of the things that I think about a lot is what is it going to take to build a movement to the scale that is necessary in order for us to not just win, but to transform our conditions and transform our society. And I think a lot about what it means to be somebody with a background in the academy, and also be someone who has a background in our communities and in the streets. And at the intersection of that are people who I believe are looking for a new way of being connected with one another, and a new way of learning how to come together when things are falling apart around us. And it reminds me that our fundamental task right now, in order to build the movement that we deserve, is to figure out how we can make justice and liberation more accessible to more people all of the time, and how in making that accessibility possible, we continue to reproduce and replicate new fighters, not just for the future, but for this decade and for this generation. So let me start off by reading a couple of pages from my book. which is coming out on Tuesday. And again, it's called The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart. This passage is special to me. It is all about how I learned my feminism. We are all shaped by the political, social, and economic context of our time. For example, my parents. My mom and dad were both born in the 1950s and came of age during the 1960s and 1970s. My dad was raised in San Francisco, California, by a wealthy Jewish family who became rich through generational transfers of wealth and by owning and operating a successful business. My mother, on the other hand, was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, the daughter of a long-distance truck driver and a domestic worker. Compared to my father's family, they were working class, but compared to other Black families, they were solidly middle class. Toledo was the home of the Libby Glass Company and other manufacturers that employed the lion's share of the population. My maternal grandparents' community consisted of Polish immigrant families and other middle-class Black families until the Polish immigrant families began to move out to the suburbs. My mother wanted more freedom than her family and her community would allow, so she kept moving, first to New York as a young woman, then joining the Army, where she was stationed at Fort McClellan in Alabama for basic training, then Fort Dix in New Jersey for more training, before heading west for a final stint at Fort Ord. My mom was raised in a context where Black women could aspire to become secretaries, domestic workers, or sales and retail clerks. My father was raised in a context where his family experienced some discrimination based on their Jewish heritage and identity, but mostly passed as white people of an elevated economic class, which meant they could reasonably expect every opportunity to be open to them. And I came of age in a very different context, at a time and in a place that were unique to me. I came to understand the world from a different set of perspectives than those of my parents and most of my peers. And yet here we all are, alive right now, making a world together, our perspectives and experiences sometimes harmonious, sometimes clashing, sometimes unrecognizable to one another. We all came into this world-making project at different times. My parents showed up in a 1966 Chevy Camaro. I arrived in a hybrid, and those who came of age in the 1990s and 2000s came through on rechargeable scooters powered by Citibank, but we're all here now. Our wildly varying perspectives are not just a matter of aesthetic or philosophical or technological concern. They also influence our understanding of how change happens, for whom change is needed, acceptable methods of making change, and what kind of change is possible. My time, place, and conditions powerfully shaped how I see the world and how I've come to think about change. So let me tell you who I am. And to tell you who I am, I have to tell you about my mother, who gave me my most enduring lesson in politics. The first step is understanding what really matters. My mother was 25 years old when she found out she was pregnant with me. When she told my biological father, he wasn't thrilled, she says dryly, but he wanted her to keep the baby. I asked her if she wanted to keep the baby. Were you scared, Mommy? I mean, wasn't there any part of you that didn't know if you wanted to have a baby? I'm trying to coax out of her a genuine answer, trying to make her comfortable enough to say yes if that was her truth. No, I knew I wanted to have you, she tells me. I didn't plan it, but when it happened, I was ready to put on my big girl pants and figure it out. Quintessential mommy, decisive and strong as an ox at 5 feet, 4 inches. There was a time when she was in love with my biological father, but when it went bad, it was over. By then, there wasn't much to do but figure out how to fight for herself and her child. For her, all of this was a long time ago, and she did her best to block it out and move on. My mother doesn't identify as a feminist, In fact, I don't believe I've ever heard her use the word. She is equally suspicious of men and women. In her experience, men have underestimated and tried to take advantage of her, while some women have tried to undercut her or compete with her, mostly for the attention of men. My childhood was littered with stories of how to protect myself from predatory men and women. Know when to go home, she would say, warning me to keep my wits about me and predict when a situation was reaching a turning point that might leave me unsafe. Always know your exits, she would say, in case I needed to escape a predator or some other emergency. Keep your blessings to yourself, she would say, as if there were someone around the corner ready to snatch a blessing from me. For her, and for me, the central question wasn't about whether she was a feminist, but whether she was able to care for her family and be cared for in return. She grew up during a time when the role of a woman was to raise a family, keep the house together, and make men's lives easier. Mommy spent her life rebelling against that, actively and implicitly. She moved to New York at 18 to be a secretary for a cinematographer and lived alone for 2 years. When she joined the military, she was the only woman in an all-male platoon where she refused to take roles reserved for women. She fought off the sexual advances of her married boss when she worked in a California prison. And when the man she thought she would marry began seeing other women while she was pregnant with me, she had to figure out how to take care of herself and her daughter. Her feminism, her politics, was her fight to survive by any means necessary. One of my earliest memories is asking my mother about a poster that she had hanging up in the apartment we shared with my uncle. The poster featured a beautiful Black woman who looked just like my mother, so much that I would regularly ask Mommy if she was sure that she wasn't the woman in the image. Casually wrapped in a goldenrod headscarf, the woman gazes out into the distance next to the words, "For colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough." I didn't know anything about the famous choreo poem, but I had a sense then, as I do now, that there was something unique about the experiences of Black women in a society that in so many ways seems to both fetishize and despise Black people. I recognized the sadness in the eyes of the woman in the poster. It mirrored the sadness in the eyes of my own mother. Among her many colloquialisms, one of my mother's favorites was "sex makes babies." For her, the practice of talking about sex was important to the well-being of her Black daughter. She never used phrases like "the birds and the bees" or "down there." There was no stork who brought a baby in a bundle to a house that wanted one. In my house, I would sit at the kitchen table late into the night while my mother would buzz around like a hummingbird. "I can't stand how white people sugarcoat everything," she would say. Buzz. "It's not the birds and the bees, it's sex. Ain't no damn stork. Sex makes babies, and babies are expensive." Buzz. Our time together, me at the kitchen table, Mommy buzzing around prepping everything for the following day, was when we would talk about such intimate topics. At the kitchen table, we would talk about consent. Mommy would tell me that I never had to hug or kiss anyone I didn't want to, even family members. She would urge me to tell her or another adult if someone touched me in a way I did not want to be touched. We would run drills in the kitchen where she would show me how to fight back against someone who was attacking me. Mommy would say, "Okay, baby girl, let's go over it again. What do you do if someone tries to grab you from behind and chokes you around the neck?" Dutifully, I would reply, "I'm going to drag my heel down their shin as hard as I can, stomp on their feet, and run as fast as I can." That's right, baby girl. Don't try to kick them in the balls. They'll be expecting that. These were my first lessons in politics. Survival and dignity were priorities, but to fight for them meant taking on overlapping challenges of economics, sex and gender politics, and race. These were also my first lessons in intersectional feminism: consent, choice, agency, pleasure, access to information, and access to contraception, up to and including abortion, were essential elements of true sexual equality. But before I had read feminist theory or taken an ethnic studies class, I knew that Black women in particular were often denied access to these things. These were not matters of academic or theoretical concern. These were problems I could see just by opening my eyes every morning. But I was also learning what it takes to fight back. My mother's determination to raise a little Black girl child and tell her that she could be as free as she wanted to be, as independent as she wanted to be, and to fight for that little Black girl to be seen as smart enough and capable enough to change the world was a revolutionary act of liberation. These were the actions of a decidedly feminist Black woman trying to raise a child, support a family, pursue her own dreams, and demand the dignity she deserved in Marin County, California. My mother's insistence on living life on her own terms and never allowing herself to be treated as inferior to anyone has had a significant impact on the way I move through the world, as well as on my vision of the world that I fight for every day, one where we can all live our lives on our own terms. For most of us, whatever we call our politics, leftist, feminist, anti-racist, dignity and survival are our core concerns. So I chose that selection because it makes me think about what matters. And in this moment where we are facing incredible challenges, it is important for the project of continuing to sustain a movement that can build the world that we deserve. It's important for us to hone in on what matters. And for me, dignity and survival is what matters. But also, I want to reshape this world, this country, our institutions, our communities, our homes, our workplaces in such a way where survival can also mean thriving. This year has been bananas. We started off with impeachment hearings. We moved quickly into presidential primaries. Then, of course, we were bombarded with a global pandemic, completely avoidable. Then, of course, an economic recession. And then, of course, a crisis in our democracy, expressed, of course, in the massive protests and rebellions that erupted across the nation in response to the ongoing police and vigilante violence that Black communities are facing every single day. And right now, we're just in October, but it feels like I've lived about 30 years in this 1 year. And I sit often and I wonder to myself, what is it going to take for us to embrace our mission of building and maintaining power that can be cooperative and independent, that can lift up everyone, as opposed to the way that it is now, which is being corrosive and being parasitic, divisive. These days, we talk a lot about Republicans and Democrats. We talk about liberals and conservatives. But actually, I think the intersection that we're at right now is love versus hate. It is dignity versus destruction. It is humanity versus dehumanization. And when I look at it that way, I understand that my tasks and our tasks are actually quite clear. Number one, our task is to develop, design, and maintain a vision for what it looks like when we have power. I don't know about you, but in all of the movements that I have ever been a part of, we have talked about what is wrong ad nauseum. We have lamented about the fact that we don't have the things that we need to live well, that people are suffering, that there is grief, that there is pain, and that there is rage. But one of the things that I say in my book is that we have to learn how to do hospice care for that which is dying. And I can guarantee you the way that this society is organized right now, the way that this economy is organized right now, it is dying. So what is the hospice care that is needed to usher away the things that no longer serve us? But we also have a task in this moment of providing prenatal care for the things that we want to grow, the things that we want to build, the world, the nation, the communities that we want to see born. So that is our first task, is to nurture that vision of what it looks like to hold both at the same time. The second thing that we must do is defend our right to operate above ground. I have to say that this administration and the way that our country is organized right now, the political conditions in this country are creating a dynamic and a mandate from this administration to drive underground all of the things that we have spent so many decades, so many generations fighting so hard for. The latest attack, for example, on critical race studies won't just end there. It will continue to spread across the knowledge that all of us have spent so much time creating. And that has deep, deep, deep significance and implications for the world that we want to build. There are people all over this nation who are grappling with trying to better understand how we got here in the first place, who is responsible, and what they can do about it. And it is institutions like this one that play a critical role in opening up minds like mine to not just better understand where we are and how we got here, but where it is that we can go together. And so we must, at all costs, defend our right to be able to operate above ground. We cannot let this powerful movement drive our powerful movement out of town. Lastly, we must pay attention to how it is that we continue to expand this movement. I know I've said it before, and I will say it until I'm blue in the face. Our task in this moment is to figure out how to add and multiply, not to subtract and divide. As somebody who comes up in the academy, what I know is that we are precise about our ideas. And sometimes that precision, right? That precision is helpful, but at times it can be harmful. In organizing, what that precision can look like is smaller and smaller silos of people who agree with each other to the highest degree. But that is different than the task of building a nation where we all belong. A nation where we all belong requires coalitions like we've never seen before, alliances like we've never seen before. And I'm not talking about that bullshit bipartisanism. I don't think that that's useful or necessary as a framework. What I'm talking about is clarifying the values that we stand on. It's not right or wrong. It's not left or right. It is survival and dignity or not. And that requires us to reimagine who might we connect with that we never thought we had something in common with before. If our movements are to expand, if our movements are to be undefeatable and indefatigable. I may have made up a word just like we do in mixed studies, but it was a good one. If our movements are to be those things, we have to focus on expanding our team. And we have to do so on values that justify, but cement and solidify the values that make us all human and that connect us as human beings. And I believe that feminism is a deep part of that project. So I want to stop here because I know there's questions and I want to spend my time in dialogue with you all. But before I end, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for supporting me. Thank you for this incredible award. And thank you for the work that you do every day to be the architects of the world that we deserve.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for all of your work and for that powerful address, for reminding us about the role of the kitchen table in world making in this moment and in general. We will now move into a conversation between Alicia Garza and two UCLA graduate students and alumna, members of CSW's Black Feminism Initiative.
Yes, yes.
I am so thrilled to welcome Brittnee Metzeinheimer, an alumni of UCLA who just earned her MA in African American Studies this past June, and Zama Dube, a PhD student in Cinema and Media Studies, both brilliant, both among this year's CSW Award recipients, and both ready to start our conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Haley. And thank you, Alicia Garza, for that amazing talk. I'm Brittnee Metzeinheimer.
Oh, and hi, my name is Zama Dube. Thank you so much for joining us, Alicia. And I absolutely loved how you opened this up by really talking about the importance of claiming feminism outside of the institution, because I believe that my feminist consciousness was actually shaped by ugogo, and that is my grandmother. So thank you so much. So I have the opportunity of actually asking you the very first question for this afternoon. And so I just want to start off by acknowledging our collective humanity, by saying that we are still in the midst of, a global pandemic, in the throes of it, and where Black life truly is and survival remains disproportionately threatened. So I want to know that as a Black, queer, dark-skinned femme, what have been your daily practices of self-care during this moment? And I know that self-care right now has become this bastardized, term that really points to white affluent women, but I'm talking about it as a radical as a radical and necessary political warfare for those who bear the brunt of waywardness.
Come on, Audre Lorde. Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to answer this question differently than I usually do. I appreciated you locating it inside of what does it look like to care for self in the midst of a global pandemic, and how can care be my and our act of political warfare. So let me just start off by saying that in March of this year, when everything went haywire, I got on a plane back from New York, where I was doing some work, and brought my Black butt home. I was like, I don't do germs like this. And Miss Rhonda looks like she not playing, and I'm not trying to play with her. So let me take my booty home. So I came home and I was like, yo, I'm always on the road. This is amazing. I actually don't have to get on planes. I don't get to spend that much time in my house. So I'm really loving being in my house. And maybe 2 months later, as we're all kind of getting used to this very bizarre situation where we are largely confined to place, sometimes deeply isolated from folk that we might see regularly, just either in passing or in community. And all of a sudden, I started seeing, first it was Ahmaud Arbery, next it was George Floyd. Shortly thereafter, it was Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, and there are so many more whose names we never hear. And everything started to erupt. So not calm, but not crazy as of pandemic, right? We're baking bread, we're planting gardens, right? We're like bottling moonshine in our bathtubs.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, right, it's helicopters over my house every single night because there's protests raging all across the nation, including just a few blocks from my home. And what that meant was that there was both a re-exposure of Black Lives Matter, and of course, a retelling of the origin stories of Black Lives Matter, which meant, again, Patrice and Opal and myself got thrown into onto a global stage. And the death threats and the harassment and all of that increased literally overnight. Where I used to spend, 15 minutes in my little breaks scrolling my Instagram, and it was pleasureful because nobody was fighting, because it's just pictures, you know what I mean? Ain't nobody fighting. I'm taking refuge in the distraction of social media. I started to get anxious about every time my phone would go off, because it would be a rape threat, a death threat, or some other vile language. And so I set this story up because I want to talk about what care has looked like for me in that context. I started to develop anxiety for the first time in my life, and actually name it that way. And I was having a conversation with Patrice one afternoon, because I was like, girl, what is happening? She was like, yo. But she reminded me, she said, well, we have been here before, and we have a lot more resources available to us now than we did. And she wasn't talking about money. What she was talking about was both experience, connection, right? But also community. And I realized that she was right. So what I did was I got a therapist who I talked to once a week.
Girl, me too.
Therapy.
So I could sleep
Yeah.
the night, because I was one of those people that was getting insomnia, pandemic insomnia, alongside the anxiety of what's happening in the world. I got a Peloton bike in March, and let me tell you, I am not an exercise person. I'm not a group exercise person, and I'm definitely not a Peloton bike type exercise person. But I have found myself breaking down in tears on that Peloton bike in a way that has been so helpful for me. And so I prioritize getting on that bike and moving my body 4 times a week. In addition to that, breaking the isolation was really important for me. I was terrified of the Rona. I was like, there's no information that I feel like I can rely on. So basically, I just got to rely on myself. And so what that meant was, I would talk to my friends on Zoom, but you wasn't coming to my house now because Miss Rona ain't playing no games. However, what I've begun to do, right, is also prioritize getting outside and prioritizing in-person connection and doing it safely. And what that means for me is really staying in relationship with the people I care about and who care about me, who can offer me perspective, right, on why it matters that we are still here, even amidst everything that is happening. And I just will close by saying that it's been in this moment that I think the way that we depend on each other to survive has been exposed in ways that we couldn't have imagined. They're not new connections and relationships, right? They're old ones that we've been gaslighted around for many, many, many decades. And pulling back the curtains and realizing that there are essential workers, right? I was like, where y'all been? How y'all got your food before? How your house got clean before, right? But I think in that there is this opportunity to actually talk about what it means to build communities of care as opposed to communities of punishment, which is what we have now. And there's nothing like this pandemic that has exposed the way that we punish people and also the way that we can care for people. And so I've been very inspired and energized by what it means to build communities of care in this moment, checking in on folks, giving people recipes who ain't cooked a day in their life, but they have to now because they can't afford to be exposed to delivery people, right? So really making sure that all of our people are okay, and knowing that when we implement these kinds of practices, as Audre Lorde said, it really isn't indulgence. It is like the ultimate middle finger to the people who are trying to kill us. So every single day that I remain alive and healthy and well is another day that I get to put my foot in the booty of the people who are trying to kill
booty.
I live.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sort of ending that response and bringing into this space that the idea about care and community care and collective care. I think that's something that I've been thinking deeply about in my academic work, but in my personal life, is how to really ground myself in sort of Black feminist informed practices of care. And so my question for you is actually, I'm not sure if you got a chance to read the piece in Vogue by filmmaker and activist Tourmaline, but they wrote this really lovely article about freedom dreaming. And they wrote, "The world that I dream of is filled with ease. I'm not satisfied with Black trans lives mattering. I want Black trans lives to be easy, to be pleasurable, to be filled with lush opportunities. I want the abundance we've gifted the world, the art, the care, the knowledge, and the beauty to be offered back to us tenfold." So I'm a bit curious about, what are your current freedom dreams, or what are you freedom dreaming about? And so you can sort of talk about care if you'd like, or other things that I think are important for us to think about how we're grounding ourselves in our freedom dreams.
Oh, yes. First of all, shout out to Tourmaline, who I got to meet on a shoot for Out magazine when Raquel Willis was the executive editor, the first Black trans woman ever to edit that magazine, which is bananas because it's 2020. Right. And I have learned so much about and been pushed by people like Raquel, like Tourmaline, who talk with us about what I would say is not settling for a politics of despair. And when we talk about it not being enough for a life to matter, I agree 100%, because the way that we talk about trans communities is in death and not in life. We talk about folks in the past tense as opposed to in the present and imagining ourselves into the future. And I don't know if you watch Lovecraft Country, but I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. And one of my favorite episodes, although how could you pick one, but that I keep coming back to, is the one where Hippolyta is like catapulted into that next galaxy. And there's a Black woman who meets her there. And she's in this like contraption with this door, and she's freaked out, and she's in these new clothes, and she's like, what's happening? I want to get out. I want to go home. And the woman says to her, you are not a prisoner here, and you can name yourself. So what is your name going to be? And I have been sitting with that for the last like 3 weeks. What if we did not see ourselves as unfortunate consequences of systems that aren't designed for us? What if we could reimagine ourselves, right? And name ourselves right now? What would we name ourselves? And I think where I'm landing is this. I spend most of my time being identified as a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. And in a lot of ways, I get named as the Black Lives Matter lady. You know, anytime something Black comes up, you'd be like, do you know Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi? And I'm like, that's all great. But I'm actually more than the Black Lives Matter lady. I do more than that. And that is something that I have been so deeply honored to contribute the smallest things to. And also I am much more expansive than that. In my freedom dreams these days, I'm thinking about truth and reconciliation, and not in like the watered down, weird ass way that people talk about it.
And not in the South African failed way.
Yeah, like not in the way that people talk about king and nonviolence, not that way, right? But in the way of understanding that there has been so much poison that any kind of transformation in this society requires not just a reckoning, but a healing. And I had a really brilliant conversation with Brian Stevenson the other day. I interviewed him for a podcast that I do called Sunstorm with my sister, iJen. And some of the things that he was talking about in terms of reckoning, I was like, we have no structures for that. We have no processes. People right now are still having trouble saying Black Lives Matter. It's less than it was 7 years ago, but it's still a problem. Every day I wake up to news about somebody who should have more information than they do, being loud and wrong. And if we are able to cleanse the stench out of this White House, there will be no change whatsoever unless we have reckoning, and unless we have healing, and unless we start telling the truth. Not the like, yeah, but what had happened was kind of truth, but like the full-throated, bold truth about how each of us has failed ourselves and each other, and how that has impacted our ability to be fully human. So I'm thinking a lot about that. And I'm also thinking a lot about reimagining rulemaking. I've spent the last 3 years building the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund. We work to make Black communities powerful in politics so we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. And I have to be honest, I hate politics. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. And I'm in this position over the last year and some change where I've had to swallow a deep disdain for the bullshit that we call politics and try to get stuff for our folks. And it's forced me to reckon with, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do you engage in these processes without adopting them or rubber stamping them? How can you keep a bold and audacious vision present? And how do you hold people accountable to a bold and audacious vision while also getting things done? And it's hard. It's really, really hard. I don't know if it's an opportunity yet. I haven't decided how to describe it, but y'all know, you heard about Ice Cube. And so my brother Roland was like, this dude is talking wild and I need you to come on and have this conversation. And I was like, that's not my job. And Roland was like, don't you worry. I am also going to handle business. What I am asking, right, is for a complimenting of this read that I'm going to give. But here's what happened in that moment for me. I mean, I did give a read and I felt really good about it. But I realized that so much of this nonsense that we see from our folks has to do with how deeply distant we have been and been kept from being able to make the decisions over our own lives. It results from generations and generations of deep trauma. And there is nothing wrong with what Ice Cube is saying, except the conclusion that he's come to. And I feel like we have to be able to hold both at the same time. And I want to help design a democracy where we can. And I think that there's a relationship between the naming ourselves and recognizing that we are not prisoners here, but we can be active shapers of our own destinies and our own present, really links with this vision of what it means to actually transform what politics looks like and how it functions, while also holding this dynamic tension that I feel often, which is I am focused on Black people. And that's not at the exclusion of anyone else. It's just I'm one person and I have a set of skills. And that's where I'm choosing to place my skills.
Hey, Alicia, because I'm so sorry.
Let me finish this last quick sentence. Yeah, okay. I know I'd be talking. Let me just close that. But also
delicious.
Pushing myself to think about what it means to govern for the whole in a way that I haven't done before. I'll leave it there.
No, I mean, I love hearing you talk. It's all very delicious. I'm also just feeling like I know that there's so many other people who want to ask questions, but you know, I wanted to, before we actually open up the panel, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, meditating on this actually, and how empire socially engineers itself, you know, towards its interests and sowing, you know, divisions in the underclass is basically one way, you know, that it does that by organizing against its threats. And by threats, I really just mean us, you know, Black people here, there, and everywhere. And so in a moment where Nigeria right now is calling for the abolition of SARS, you know, there's also anti-femicide protests that are happening in Namibia, in South Africa, and basically just Black life is under siege globally. So I want to know from you, how do we actually deepen diasporic engagement in conversations around Black liberation?
It has to start with relationships. And one of the things that I long for is a strengthening of the diasporic infrastructure that would allow us to have these kinds of conversations in real time more often and at scale. As a Black person born in the United States and raised as an African American, which I think is like a unique, right? Like a unique cultural experience, we don't know enough about the diaspora. And it really limits our imagination, and it also limits our ability to be powerful together. And I think that in a nation where we tell so many flaccid stories about who Black people are, there is a way in which we have internalized stories about our diaspora that are not ours, and they serve and function to not only keep us divided, right, but keep us ignorant about each other. And that is a poison pill. So I sit with that a lot. And part of what we have done to try to address this is in our Black Census Project, for example, we tried to tell a new story of who Black folks are, recognizing that most people, when they describe Black folks, they talk about people of color, which is Iranian.
Oh, that's different. I'm a Black person. Let's just get that quick.
Or we talk about African Americans as if that encapsulates the totality and the complexity of us. And I think that we deserve better. And so in our Black Census Project, the largest survey of Black people in 155 years in America, we get to touch on that in really important and bold ways. And so I'm looking forward to expanding on that work as my contribution to building those kinds of relationships that can be a model, or at least an example of how we build relationships across the diaspora so that we can be more powerful together and in an actual global movement.
Love that. Thank you so much.
You.
Oh.